Sue Nelson. I'm a space and science journalist, and I'm also the author of Wally Funk's Race for Space. And this is who I want to talk about, Wally Funk. This is her when she was in her early 20s. She was a pilot, still is a pilot, still likes flying. And this is a Redstone rocket, which is what Wally and 12 other women would have flown on into space in America 60 years ago if only they'd been given the opportunity. Now, basically, Wally was a pilot, flying and also training in the early 60s, actually training military people how to fly. So that was pretty unusual at the time. But what she did, along with other female pilots in America, they answered a call to take the same tests as the Mercury 7. Now, the Mercury 7 were a group of 7 men, all pilots, who passed the really tough physical tests in order to become an astronaut. So the guy who supervised those tests, called Dr. Randy Lovelace, he wanted to see if women could also take those tests and pass. So he got one woman first, name of Jerry Cobb, and she not only passed, but she did better than pretty much all of the men in terms of her scores. So he opened it up to more pilots, and that's how Wally Funk found out about it and took part. And she was the youngest. The ages of the women range from 40 to early 20s, which is where Wally was, and only 13 passed. But these tests were tough, really tough. If you've ever seen the film The Right Stuff, which is brilliant, by the way, also a good book, it explains what the men did, and they make you wince because there were tubes going in them, up them, everywhere. They would make them exercise and cycle and test their blood function, their oxygen uptake, until they would collapse. It was extraordinarily tough. And then if you watch that and see it and then realize the women did the same and passed, you'll be more than impressed. So what happened when they passed this test was they were all due to take further tests to finish it off, like the final little, like hardly any really. And for those women, it would have been an absolute piece of cake. But unfortunately, as it was a privately funded program, the funding was lost. So 2 women tried to get NASA to admit women. Said, come on, we've got these amazing women here ready to go. But it was too soon for the times, for everything. And NASA didn't admit women until 1978, which is a huge shame because several of the women performed better than the men in some of the exercises. And Wally in particular, she did the isolation test, which is harder than it sounds, because if you're told, well, you have to stay in a room and be isolated, well, we all know how to do that. But what they did was they took away all your senses. So it was dark, you couldn't see. It was quiet, you couldn't hear anything. They kept the temperature of the room similar to your skin, so they couldn't feel anything. And in Wally's case, they were put in an isolation tank. So you were sort of floating, and she's described it as the nearest to being in space as she could ever get. And it does a lot of things psychologically to your mind. A lot of people, it upsets them a lot. It's very disorientating. They get anxious or start to babble or all sorts of, people just don't like it. We're not solitary creatures. We like other human beings. Wally smashed the test. She did better than all the women and all of the men who were astronauts at the time. She did it in 10 hours, 35 minutes. That's how long she spent in this isolation tank. And in fact, she could have gone on much longer because they had to pull her out. She didn't stop it. So you can sort of get an idea of what an extraordinary sort of mind she's got, how determined she is. And she's still determined. She wants to get into space. So she's bought a ticket with Virgin Galactic and is on that waiting list, is ready to go. Virgin have already had a number of successful tests, and she's ready. She's done amazing things in her life. You know, she was the first woman aviation safety instructor in America. She was an air crash investigator. She broke barriers in so many ways, not just through taking those tests and becoming known as the Mercury 13, as they're now known, because of the 13 women who passed, but also for continuing to break barriers as a pilot, as well as somebody who wants to be an astronaut. In fact, in her, I think she was 60, she did her first zero-G flight. So she's floated, so weightlessness in those microgravity conditions already. She's done that twice. She keeps really fit so that she will be physically fit and ready to go. And there are not many left now of these women. Wally being the youngest, it's, you know, that's why fortunately she's still with us. There are a few of them left, and they're all extraordinary women. And it's important that we know that there were these women, all women in fact, in space history, because you'd be forgiven for thinking, if you look at the pictures at the time of early space flight, these incredible achievements, but you nearly always see men. It's men's faces in the control room, the male astronauts. You don't see women, at least not on the American side at that time. Thankfully, because of the book Hidden Figures, people are now also becoming reacquainted, or sometimes for the first time finding out about the women who were there, who've always been there. There were nurses, there were engineers, there were mathematicians. And now, hopefully, loads of people know there were women too who wanted to be astronauts, who were qualified and good enough to be astronauts. So if your ambition is to be an engineer, do maths, get into space in any way or form, don't give up on your dream. Do it. You can be a part of the space industry. Women have done this and been part of the space industry for a long time. It's just that we're only now beginning to realize that they were there a lot longer than people thought. So be more Wally. Be determined. Don't give up. Fight for what you believe in and keep on aiming high.